A skeleton plan for an essay. What is it and how do we do it? That's what we're going to be covering in today's video. I'm going to be showing you a really quick skeleton essay plan that I've written in response to a couple of Rear Window questions. Now, if you're studying Rear Window, that's going to be really helpful for you. But even if you're not, you'll still find this video helpful because rather than really jumping into the text and all of the ideas of the text, I'm going to be taking a look at how we go about writing these responses. And so the question that we're using to base our skeleton plan on today is one of the Rear Window questions from last year's exam. Jeff's fascination with looking at others stops him from truly looking at himself. Do you agree? And so what I want to do with a skeleton essay is I want to write a plan that is somewhere between a little bit more than a scribble on a piece of paper and an essay itself. So somewhere between those two things exists a skeleton plan. So this is for those of you that maybe don't have a full hour to write a 1 hour essay, or maybe you're tired of writing full essays, or maybe you just want to expose yourself to as many questions and get your brain ticking over with planning responses. And you're at the point now where you know how you're going to go about writing your essay. You really just want to build up your bank of evidence and ideas and thinking. And you know that if you write a really thorough plan, it's almost as good as writing a full essay anyway. Then this is a really good planning strategy for you. And so as we look at that question, this is a quick plan that I wrote. And you can see here, I thought about changing it up and putting it on a PDF with logos and making it all pretty. And I thought it'd be more effective to show you the actual working document. And you can see the planning that I went through here. I took about 10, maybe 15 minutes to write this skeleton plan. And you'll see here the balance that exists between it being a bit more than a scribbled down plan, but at the same time, not a full essay, obviously. The first thing that you can see there is that idea of fascination, that Jeff's fascination, and making sure that I'm always in the habit of not ignoring those key parts of a question. And the idea of being fascinated, I started to look at some synonyms. Something that you should always be doing when you're looking at essay questions is always thinking of synonyms for the key terms. Not just because it's going to help you with your language use and making sure that you're not being repetitive, but also because you are going to be opened up to new ways of thinking about the ideas and new ways of looking at the text if you're thinking about slightly different words, because they'll give you a new dynamic and a new way of thinking about what might be said in the question. And so you can see there that I've taken the word fascination to be an obsession, or the fact that someone could be taken over by something. And so that has had an impact on my thinking, and you'll see that when it comes to the planning later on. The very first line that I have here is this idea of to compromise by coming to an understanding of another's point of view. That was the first thing that I thought. And the reason that I've put that in is to show you that the first place my mind goes when I look at an essay question is, overall, what will my response be? Now, sometimes by the time you get to the end of planning, you realize that you've actually gone off in a different direction, but it's a really great place to start to think, well, ultimately, what will my response be to that question? And ultimately, my thinking is that Jeff has this fascination with looking with others, but it is his ability to eventually see another person's point of view that is the key idea of this film and Jeff's main lesson and one of Hitchcock's main ideas. And so I'm going to use that. And I'm looking at, well, how does that happen? And that's allowed me to get to my 3 key ideas. So I've asked myself, well, what are these factors that impact his ability to look at himself? And so this first idea that you can see here, a distraction from pressures and the expectations of a society. Now, if you're studying Rear Window, you might be able to get a bit out of this and think, oh, that's an interesting way of going about it. If you're not studying Rear Window, what I want you to think about is looking at the question itself and then looking at the responses given for these 3 paragraphs and seeing the link that exists. One thing that I really want to be working on when it comes to skeleton planning is making sure that the responses I'm coming up with for my paragraphs are really great direct responses to the question. And while we're planning and getting ready for SACs or exams, if we make mistakes and we actually realize, oh, actually 2 of my ideas aren't really responding to the question, well, that's okay. It's a good mistake to make before you go ahead and make it in the SAC or the exam. You'll notice here that I've highlighted the topic sentences for all of them, making sure that I've got that real sense of, okay, the question was asking about Jeff's fascination with looking at others. Do I agree? Well, my answer to that is going to be, well, the reason that he is so obsessed with looking at others is because he's looking to distract himself from the pressures and the expectations of a society. And so one thing you'll notice there, whether you have viewed and studied Rear Window or not, is that it takes the response to the question in saying, yes, well, I agree that he does have a fascination with looking at others that stops him from looking at himself, but I'm going to look at the reasons as to why that exists, and that leads me to this other idea. So now I can start talking about the expectations of a society. Really, really important that I don't just dismiss the original topic and think, all right, now I'm just going to go off and talk about expectations of a society, but rather I talk about them in conjunction with each other so that I have this rounded response that is adhering to the topic whilst bringing in an exploration of ideas that have an impact on what that topic is. And so you'll see there that I've talked there just generally in really note-taking like language. Trapped, sense of worth comes from his occupation, expectation to marry. So all of these things, I know that I can write about them in a much more fluent manner if I had to come exam time. Of course, I wouldn't advise you to only skeleton plan because your ability to write these paragraphs and write them fluently and write fluent essays is what you're going to be judged on. But at the same time, I wouldn't advise you to only write full essays either, because sometimes you can get a lot more bang for your buck by spending an hour doing 3 or 4 of these than writing one full essay. The idea here, though, is that we're focusing on the skills, and that whilst we're not building our skill of being able to write with clarity and fluency and writing a full essay, we are focusing on the skill of planning a question, remembering evidence, being able to respond to a question in great depth and great detail. And that's what we're going to continue to focus on. You'll notice there as well that there are some quotes. Nagging wife, too perfect. I don't have to put in all of the quotes that I'm going to use, but there are a few of them that are there. The final thing with this first idea is that in italics here at the end, I've made sure that I would have that really strong sense of this is what I'm ultimately saying through this paragraph and checking it against the question. So again, it said his obsession with looking at others stops him from looking at himself. I've then put here that I'd make sure in that paragraph, I finished it off with that this stops him from truly examining his own feelings or his vulnerability. So therefore, that is a direct response to that question. Not looking at himself is what the question said. Truly examining his own feelings or vulnerability is what I've said in response. You can see that tight connection. You can see that even though, they're just different words, that it's a similar idea and it's a response to the question. So with these final 2 ideas, I'm not going to go into depth with them in taking you through every single little thing about them. Rather, I'm going to point out some features that came out as I went through and planned them. You can read them for yourself. You can pause the screen and take a look through the ideas and see how I've gone about answering them. But I do want to show you a couple of things. First of all, both of them have this idea at the end where they have this italicized idea of exactly how they respond to the question. And that's really, really important that I've made sure that I'm always checking myself against the question. One last thing I want to show you is that when I came to this second idea that you can see here in the middle, I originally wrote female intuition sells books. And I knew straight away that wasn't the direct quote. That was the quote that came to me. I was a little bit rusty with my knowledge of this text, and that'll happen to you too. That's the idea of revision after all. But the first thing I did was to Google that quote and Google enough about it so that I knew that it would come up with the absolute correct quote, and I put it in there here. The actual quote is female intuition stuff sells magazines. So I was close. Books, magazines, female intuition, feminine intuition. But it's important to be accurate. The reason I put that in there is along that idea of showing you the warts and all sort of planning, but understanding that that's a good process to go through in the weeks leading up to a SAC or an exam, to think to yourself, I know vaguely what the quote is, and looking it up, getting it right, and make sure that you really cement in that understanding of the true quote. The best way to remember quotes is to use them. It's not to put them up on a wall and stare at them for hours on end. It's to use them as a part of your writing so they become a part of your working memory. And so guys, that is just a few ideas that come about when we look at skeleton planning. If you've got something out of this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you've got any questions about Rear Window, about the VCE English exam, about skeleton planning and how to get the most out of your time when it comes to revising, please put them down there in the comments and I'll be happy to get to them and help you out. All the best for the rest of your studies, and until I see you next time, good luck.